Okay, now let's talk about elifs in Python and the equivalent in Java. In this case, so what elifs are really good for is if you don't have just two different conditions like black or white, so if you have multiple different conditions that you want to check for, then you can use elifs in order to do that. So for example, in this case, in my Python code, I have a variable number that is set equal to 0. So in this case, I have three different conditions I'm looking at. Here, if number is equal to 0, then I want to print Queen Elora. However, if it's not 0 and if it's actually a negative number, then I want to print Lance is my son. However, if it's neither of those two conditions and I actually want to check for when number is positive or greater than 0, then I want to print Keith is my son-in-law. So what elifs are really good at is that you can define multiple different conditions to look at and execute multiple different code. In this case, because number is set equal to 0, I am going to be going into this first if statement and print Queen Elora, and Python will just ignore these other two blocks of if statements, essentially. So now let's look at this code actually in Java. So let me just delete this. I'm going to be doing it inside the conditionals class file once again, and what I'm going to be doing is converting this code that we just looked at into Java. So first what we need to do is declare a number variable. So int number is equal to 0. So the first statement is pretty easy. It's what we looked at before. So we want to print out Queen Elora. And the statement is only when number is equal to 0. However, what happens if it's a negative number? So in this case, in Java, you actually can't abbreviate it into elif. You have to say else if, two separate statements here. So else if number is less than 0, then I am going to be printing out Lance is my son. But it's like, no, it's neither of those two statements, neither of those two conditions. So I'm going to do what if, else if, number is greater than 0. What if it's a positive number? Then I want to print out Keith is my son-in-law. Perfect. Now, as long as there's no compilation error, we should be okay. So let's go here right now. And first we're going to, I can't spell, we're going to compile it. We're going to run it. Perfect, Queen Elora. And the reason why is because we had set our number to be equal to 0, which we expect to go into this first case and skip over the next two cases. Let's try it when it is equal to 100, so a positive number. Then we should expect to get into this third case because we have an else if number is greater than 0 and 100 is greater than 0. So we should expect to have this program print out Keith is my son-in-law. So let's see what happens then. Perfect, Keith is my son-in-law. Now let's see what happens if I print out, or if I assign number to be a negative 1. So we should expect to get into the second case where number is less than 0. So we should print out Lance is my son. Perfect. So that's how you do if and else if statements. Okay, and I have the equivalent here in the image format. And another thing I did is that because I think it's a little repetitive to say else if number is greater than 0, I actually omitted that part out and just used else, because if number is not 0, if number is not negative, then the only other option probably is number is greater than 0, which is a positive. So you can just say for all other cases, then Keith is my son-in-law. And the all other case statement is that number is a positive number. Now I wanted to go over the difference between a series of else-if statements and a series of if statements. So these two codes look exactly the same, except on the left-hand side we have if, else-if, and else. On the right-hand side we have if, with the same exact conditions. So what's great about else-ifs is that, in this case, we have number is equal to 0. So it'll first go into this block of code. It'll print Queen Elora. But then it's like, okay, so if I've gotten into this condition, that means that the other conditions don't matter. So Java will actually not even read this condition and just skip the else's over. So it actually saves a lot of time. On the right-hand side, on the other hand, so once again, we have number is equal to 0. It'll print from Queen Elora here, but it's like, oh my gosh, I also need to check this if statement, and I also need to check this if statement. So it'll actually take time to read, is this number less than 0? It's not, so I'm not going to print. Okay, now let me check. Is number greater than 0? It's not, so I'm not going to print, Keith is my son-in-law. So in the right-hand side, if you have a series of if statements, Java actually takes time to read every single condition. On the left-hand side, when we use the if, else if, and else statements here, it'll actually just say, oh, I got into that first case, so I don't have to look at the other ones, and just skip over those and don't even consider those conditions. So when you're thinking about using multiple conditions, I just want you to be conscientious of these two differences.